Hello and welcome to the Q&A session for Primary Science Getting Started. We hope you've enjoyed the last few weeks of the online course. Sarah and myself are here to answer some of the questions that you put in the final stage of the course. There were a lot of questions, so thanks ever so much for those. So we just picked a few that came up a lot. And we chose those to answer. So unfortunately, if your question doesn't get answered, please do feel free to contact us through STEM Learning and we'll try and answer it if it's a real need of yours. So one of the questions that came up a lot was people were really interested in the concept cartoons, how to use them in class, what sorts of ideas. Lots of people say, where'd you get them from? The best way I found with concept cartoons is when I first started using them, I did have one that I had a book full of them, and you can find that if you just have a look for concept cartoons, you can find the books. But then I started developing my own, so I'd be teaching a particular unit, for example, the circulatory system, and I'd come up with a statement that I thought might, ask the children what their understanding was, and then leave the blanks for them to have a go. I used either pictures of my own class, or I've started using puppets and toys that I have in my at home to develop my own concept cartoons, and it works really well because then you can target the questions that you want to know the answers to. So if, for example, you're in your class and you're thinking, there's that statement of the curriculum, I'm not quite sure if they understand it, you can set a concept cartoon up to answer that. So if it's at the beginning of a unit and you want to know exactly what the children already know, you could pick a statement from the national curriculum and have 3 blanks. Another quite nice way to do concept cartoons is to have a statement that's not quite there, it's got a small misconception, maybe another one with a small misconception, and then one that is the correct statement, and then ask the children which one they agree with, and maybe have a blank one if they don't agree with any of them, and then you've got a real clue as to what the children really do understand.
Lots of you also asked about whether children should know which type of inquiry they are doing, and if you should cover all the inquiry types in one topic. Well, in terms of whether the children should know about the inquiry types that they're covering, the answer is yes, but it depends on which year groups that they're in as to how much of that they need to do for themselves. For example, then in the national curriculum, it does say that at Key Stage 1, the children should be helped to develop their understanding of scientific ideas by using different types of scientific inquiry to answer questions. So by that, we would expect that you might be doing something like an observation over time, and the children would hear those words observation over time. They're being directed towards those types of investigations, and they're starting to hear those terms and understand what they mean. By lower Key Stage 2, the national curriculum says that they should ask their own questions about what they observe and make some decisions about which types of scientific inquiry are more likely to be the best ways of answering them. So in lower Key Stage 2, we'd be looking for the children to know what the inquiry types are so that they could have a little bit of an idea about when they've got a question, how would they answer it? Which type of inquiry would they choose? And they're starting to be directed by the teacher toward those, so they're starting to make those decisions. By upper Key Stage 2, the children need to be able to select the most appropriate inquiry types to answer the questions. So they need a full understanding of what the inquiries are, so they choose the right ones. In terms of inquiry types and whether you cover them all in each topic, that would be impossible. You need to cover the inquiry types over a year. So if you were to plan that out on the planning grids that we showed you earlier in the course, you'd be able to make sure that you had a good selection of the 5 different types of inquiry throughout the whole year. Some topics lend themselves brilliantly to some types of inquiry, and they really don't lend themselves well to others. And I wouldn't worry about that if that's the case.
So the next few questions came in from teachers who were interested in what science might look like in the early years. So that's children aged 3 to 5. What's good practice? What should they be doing? What sorts of things would good science look like in an early years classroom? Well, really, science in the early years should be based on what the children's interests are and follow their own questions and their own explorations. We as teachers and practitioners should be there to provide the stimulus, the ideas, the engagement, but not specifically the science, which is quite hard to do when you're a teacher and you're thinking, right, I've got these particular goals that I need to meet. But what is so lovely about the early years is the characteristics of effective learning that we need to be sharing with the children are science. They're the working scientifically skills. So if you're meeting those, if you're helping the children to develop their perseverance, their group work, their problem solving skills, then you are getting those children to work as scientists. Now, there are statements in the early years framework that say we should be looking at, observing the seasons, to be going outside, to be looking at materials, and all those sorts of things. If we set up our classroom in a way that our continuous provision provides those examples for the children, then they'll be hopefully getting that science. And our job is then to sit alongside them, play alongside them, to guide them through I wonder statements. I wonder if that apple will sink. What do you think? And then letting the children engage. It is about providing those resources. A really good resource EYFS classroom lets the children be scientists all the time, and then we build on their prior experience, we develop their curiosity, we just stand alongside the children and support them. Really nice examples of enhancing your continuous provision are things like, if you've read a story, for example, a really good one, The Gingerbread Man, is providing maybe in the water tray some gingerbreads for the children to dip into the water and pretend that they're crossing the river. If you're reading The Three Little Pigs, can you provide different materials that children could build the Three Little Pigs house from? And then, how hard do we have to blow to get those houses to fall down? It's really about the children's daily work, the children's daily play, and seeing the science opportunities and going, I wonder.
We've also had a lot of questions about teaching a whole investigation. Earlier in the course, we discussed about how you needed to be very focused when you're getting the children to work scientifically and running practical investigations. For lots of you, you've been running full investigations and you're wondering whether you shouldn't do that anymore. Now, it's not so much about running the whole investigation. It would be a shame to get to show children an investigation and not get them to carry that out. However, it is about being focused on the working scientifically that you're doing. So if you were in an English lesson, if you're in English, you would just practice one skill at a time, such as paragraphs. The focus would be on that. The teaching would be on that. And then the assessment of the piece of writing would most likely be on that. We wouldn't be asking them to do a piece of writing and teaching them about spelling, punctuation, paragraphs, adjectives in the same session and then expecting them to evidence them all. It's impossible. The children couldn't possibly do that, and you couldn't teach that as well as you possibly could. So in science, it's exactly the same. If we're going to run an investigation, we need to choose which skill it is that we're focusing on, and it is that one that you are teaching the children and that you would be evidencing at the end. So you could choose to do your investigation in a number of ways. You could run the whole investigation, but only guide that bit. That is the teaching focus. You could decide to actually just do that bit of the investigation. It's whichever works best in the time that you've got, and also works best for the objective that you're doing. In the ASC magazine, there was a wonderful picture that was put in there that was a working scientifically butterfly. And I think this is a great way that teachers can actually plan and then show the children what skills it is that they're using. The idea with a working scientifically butterfly is that you would have that up on your wall laminated, and that when you were planning, you'd look carefully at the different sections and choose which of the skills you're going to focus on. So it could be questioning. You would make sure that when you do your lesson, that you tell the children that that is the skill that you're focusing on. And again, you would colour that in so you could see that you've covered your questioning. It's absolutely fine if you want to run investigation and do it over a number of sessions so that you could focus on a different working scientifically skill in each session. That would be absolutely fine. I know a couple of you have questioned whether you should be doing that. You could also use your maths and English lessons to pick up some of those skills that fall very nicely within those topics. And actually having the time to use your English time to write your conclusions would actually be of value.
So this next set of questions follows on from Sarah's explanation there on investigations. And the question was, if you've got a class and they're all working away, so you've got 30 children, how do you stop them going off on a tangent that you hadn't planned? I've got personal experience of this. I was teaching a lesson on filtration, and I had set the task. I'd got some dirty water at the front of the classroom, and the challenge was, okay, which group can get it the cleanest by the end of the session? I didn't tell them what they needed to do. They needed to pick their own equipment. They needed to sort of plan it. And I actually have my head teacher in watching me in this lesson. And so, you know, I was wandering around and he was sat with a particular group and they started talking about, we'd introduced it as a hook of, I'd just come back from Africa and I said the children in Africa struggle to filter their water, to get clean water to drink. So, you know, what sorts of things could we do to help them? And the children in the group that he was sat with were actually talking about whether giraffes licking the water would make a huge issue, you know, for cleaning the water, and whether we needed to think about giraffe saliva and stuff like this. And he said he was really worried that they were going off this very strange tangent. But what I had done is I'd set them off, they were having a chat, they were planning, and then I stopped them. So it was very quick, you know, they had about 3 or 4 minutes to just chat. Then they all had to feed back to me. So it was kind of like what we used to call in my school a mini plenary. So I would stop the whole class and I would just say, okay, tell me what you're doing. Each one of you watching your idea. It had to be a quick 2 second. We couldn't spend the whole lesson them feeding back. And then I could go, you're on the wrong tangent. Or I just go, oh, you know, when you were listening to Ben's ideas, did you pick anything up from there? So that they were all then going, that's where we're going. And then I set them off again. And then again in 5 minutes. Oh, tell me what you've done. And then I'd say, okay, in 10 minutes, you need to report back on this. So I was always keeping the children on task. They were always going on the way that I wanted them to. They might be having different investigations. They might have different ideas, but I was always aware of what they were. And then if they were quite going off on the wrong way, I could pull that group back to what I wanted. It's about just knowing, you know, yes, you can't work with all 10 groups in one lesson, but you can just get them to feed back to you really quickly so that you are, that person isn't quite where I want them to be. Or get another child to go that, oh, you know, you're doing a brilliant job. Can you go and share that with that group and share them what they're doing? And they might pick up some bits. It is about using timers, using the roles, making sure everyone's really clear on the roles that they've got in their group. Maybe having a particular child whose role it is to report to the teacher or the teaching assistant, if you're lucky enough to have one, what it is they're busy doing, and then you can pick up whether they're on the track that you want them to be.
One of the most common questions that we had was about how do we assess working scientifically. This comes up time and time again, which always surprises us actually, because I think when it comes to science, assessment suddenly seems like this scary thing, but actually it is exactly the same as that we would do in all of our other core subjects. If you do need any extra help with this, we do have a great additional MOOC that you can have a little look at that focuses on assessment for learning, which is one of the things that we really do use in our science when we are doing our assessment. And so I would thoroughly recommend getting yourself involved with that course as well. When it does come to assessing working scientifically, though, we need to make sure, as I mentioned earlier, that we are clear with our focus and that we're actually planning for assessment. Many times we actually think, oh, that's a great investigation, and run it without actually thinking about what it is that we're wanting to teach, or what is the value behind that. What is our actual outcome that we're wanting? What are we wanting the children to learn? And actually that should be the first thing that we're thinking about. And so we're actually choosing our activities to fit that. And again, once you have that, you then need to think about exactly how you're going to assess it. And there are numerous ways that we could be doing it within our working scientifically. Karen mentioned earlier about EYFS, and actually they are the perfect people to be taking examples for. They are the perfect practitioners when it comes to absolute observation and assessing through that. And I would certainly, if you're unsure about how to do that, just take a little bit of time to go and talk to your colleagues in the EYFS, or actually just drop in and watch them for a little bit, because you'll learn so much, and it'll be so helpful for your assessment in science. But it could be in other ways. You could be asking the children just to note down their ideas on post-it notes. It could be that you're actually getting them to do a little bit of writing. It could be that you're using technology. There are some great apps these days that you can use that allow the children to actually record themselves, and actually that is stored so the teacher can look back at that. And that could be recording through a video recording. It could be pictures. It could be them actually writing onto the screens, and these all get saved, and then the teacher can look at them later on. You could also ask the children to do some little quick assessment tasks. These working scientifically quick assessment tasks have just simply been written from the working scientifically statements. And it might be a starter at the beginning of the lesson, or even better if it was at the end of the previous lesson, so that you're actually planning for what you find out from this little assessment. They're little focused activities that you can do. So if you were wanting to know how well the children ask questions, it could be that you set up one of those raisins in lemonade activities, like again you saw earlier in this course. That you could ask the children then to generate as many questions as they could. And then that could be your assessment. There are some great websites that can also help us, and materials that are already out there that can really help us with our working scientifically assessment. The Plan Assessment website has got some fantastic progression grids. It has got planning matrices, which also look at where your assessment could be. They are free and available to download. The TAPS that is available on the PSTT website is fantastic as well for assessing your working scientifically. And on there are some focused assessment tasks, which you could be planning straight into your session of lessons on a topic that would help you to assess your working scientifically.
So the next question was just a really short one. Some people are worried about the amount of science that they're expected to do. It is in England, it is a core subject. It's one that needs to be taught. It's statutory guidance states, that you need to get certain things done. How you work that in your school is completely up to you. Guidance from a report produced by the Wellcome Trust stated that most schools who are doing well in science, their Key Stage 1 children are doing about an hour and a half every week of science. And at Key Stage 2, that goes up to about 2 or 3 hours. Now, do you teach that every week? Do you teach it as a block? Again, that's up to your school and your policies. I personally would recommend that science is taught weekly, that it's done as a progressive subject, so that you're keeping those skills going, and that you're not doing 6 weeks of it here and then not touching it till the next year, because then there's no skill development. The children might have forgotten how to do half the things that they've been practicing. And like anything, if you keep doing it, you're going to get better and better at it. We wouldn't just do 6-week block of English. The other issue that personally we have with blocking is, say a child is poorly for 2 weeks and they may have missed that entire unit of science. So that's the guidance that comes from the Wellcome Trust. There is no statutory guidance for the amount of hours, but I just leave it out there. It is a core subject within England, so I leave it up to you to decide, how much you want to do and what fits into your curriculum. And one question that really interested me was, someone asked how you can use the famous scientists. It's mentioned in the curriculum that we should be using scientists and studying scientists, and how their work reflects on modern science. And it's really interesting way. I love looking at scientists and how what they did in the past reflects on what we do now. I mean, quite often, a lot of the scientists that are mentioned, especially in the English national curriculum, are old dead white men. And we always say, what does that show to our children, that science is something that's been done to us and it's happened and it's not going on anymore? But then the example I'm going to use is actually a guy from that category. So thinking back to Darwin, for example. So Darwin, very famous for his ideas around evolution. He started, and he used to do every day in his garden, a thinking walk. Well, I started doing that with my early years class, and I'd take them outside and we'd go for a walk and we'd look at things. It's brilliant to do all year because you can see the changing of seasons. You can see, oh, look, there's mini beasts out now. They weren't there. Look at the tadpoles and that sort of thing. And that's exactly what he did. Now, do we talk about that with our children? Yes, absolutely. We say, Darwin came up with this amazing theory of evolution that's been proved. And he did it by wandering around and just looking at things. We can all be scientists. Someone like Macintosh, who developed the waterproof, he looked at what his workers were wearing, and they were wearing animal skins and getting wet and ill and cold. What could be better? So he started looking at different materials. It didn't stop. We don't all keep wearing those bright yellow sou'westers that he developed. We now wear Gore-Tex. Where did that come in? Who's the scientist that looked at that? Where's it going to go now? Are we going to have better waterproof material? And then trying to think of other people. So there's a brilliant lady, a Scottish lady called Valerie Hunter Gordon, who developed the very first disposable nappy. Yes, disposable nappies might not be so great now, but when she developed them, she was a mother of 5, needed something to help her out. What can we look at now? I saw an article just the other day about bottles that are made from fungus. So you drink it, it looks like a glass bottle. You can throw it away and it just disintegrates. There's nothing left because it's a natural material. Google Glass, it's fascinating. You touch it and it can do things. There had to be a scientist that developed that. So just bringing those in, looking at the science behind what the scientist did. So it doesn't just have to be Darwin was a man, he lived in 18 something, it doesn't have to be just a write a biography of a famous scientist. It can actually be what's the science that scientist developed and how has it got implications for what we do today.
Now, throughout the course, Explorify has come up. It has been mentioned by us, but more and more we get comments from you guys saying about how you're using it in the classroom and about how much you are loving it. And for those of you that actually haven't been on the website yet and had a look around, I'd encourage you to do it as quickly as possible and actually get it embedded in your lessons in school, because it is a fantastic resource. Some of you, though, have just come across it and have been asking about, yeah, it looks great, but actually what is the best way that we can be using Explorify? Now, Explorify is such a versatile resource. It's fabulous. It's there to support both the content and our working scientifically, and so can be used in lots of different ways within our lessons. Explorify website actually says it's there to introduce new science topics. It's there to provide continuity between lessons, to assess learning and progress, revisit prior learning, develop children's skills in working scientifically, and to support cross-curricular learning. I'd suggest that all of you actually have a little look at the download section, which is one of the tabs that's across the top on the website. And on there, there's some fantastic resources, including vocabulary lists. They also have an inquiry planning sheet, which highlights all the activities that they have on there and which curriculum area that they fit into. So that would be a perfect start for you actually thinking about actually getting those into your lesson time. There's also a great blog section which talks about lots of different ideas of how you can use how you can use Explorify in the classroom. In terms of assessment, you could use it in, again, numerous different ways. You could use it as a starting point to actually see what the children's prior learning is. You could use it as that little assessment tool to see if they have got any misconceptions. As the children are progressing through a sequence lessons on a topic, you could be using it throughout that sequence to actually see what the children know. Have they retained any of that knowledge from before? Are they starting to apply some of the ideas that you've been introducing? And then again, at the end, you could be using it as a test to see, as a test. I'll try that again. I hate the word test. And at the end of your teaching sequence, you could be using it there to see what the children have remembered and whether their discussions are actually reflecting what they have been learning. In terms of the current climate as well, Explorify have opened themselves up for home learning, and there's lots of great ideas about how parents can be using them at home with their children as well.
So a lot of people asked around how do we support our SEND children in science, and SEND is a huge category. There may be in any one class, every single child in that class may have a different level of SEN. You may have particular children who are autistic or have sensory impairments or behaviour impairments. The breadth of SEND need within any classroom is too big for me to sort of comment and say this works really, really well. So I think it's about knowing your children, and the fact that science is a brilliant subject for any child to take part in. From those children who are working right at the bottom of the P scales, where they can just use their eyes or they can just touch things, right up to those who are high functioning and have really good high cognitive ability and maybe just struggle a little bit with a practical activity or with writing. If you've got dyslexic children, the most dyslexic child I've ever worked with was my most amazing science person, because he thought a lot. He constantly thought. Gave him a piece of paper to write his thoughts down, it wasn't going to happen. And that's why science is so great, because if you can take the time to listen to that child, to come up with a different way of them engaging with the task, then you win them over. You sort of say you need to know your children, you need to know what works for them. Does a visual stimulus work? So can you use visual guides? Can you use different ways of recording for those children? Can you have a different way of approaching a session? And maybe if a child struggles with their behaviour for a long period of time, give them 2-minute little tasks. One resource that I think is a wonderful one comes from Sheffield Hallam University, and they've developed a Science for All programme, and it's called a focus frame, and it's a piece of paper or a laminated bit, and you put whatever it is the children are working on in the centre, and then just have 4 more if the children can cope with it, activities, questions around the outside, and the children are then focusing just on that one thing, and they've got their 4 questions, their 4 ideas to work around. They know there's an end goal. It's not an open task, because that might challenge some children, and they know that if they just do those 4, then they've met the task for that session. There are other things on that website as well, the Science for All website, which have got some lovely things, using photographs, using practical things, a science cupboard, so the children can go and explore. So I think with SEND, it is just about knowing your children and what works for them, and then finding a way through. Another thing that worked really well for my children was structuring the questions that I gave them. So it wasn't one question for the entire class, and my task some children to answer a very simple question, but then they have succeeded in answering that question, and other children a more complex question, and they've succeeded in answering that question. So there's nothing worse than everyone having the same and you don't manage to do any of it. But your friend over the other side of the class has managed great big things. If we've all managed to do the bit that you've been set, then it's a win.
And finally, lots of you again have asked about the different examples of activities for each topic, because for any of us, those quick wins of being able to look and find some ideas to get us going with our planning are just the most helpful thing when we've got a million and one other things that we need to be focusing on as teachers. I would start with just having a little look at the non-statutory guidance, which is actually in the national curriculum. It's a bit that we don't often read, because we're finding the statement that we're working on through lots of different means, and a lot of the time that's not actually looking at the national curriculum. But the non-statutory guidance actually does give us some examples of activities that we could be carrying out with the children, and I would certainly start with there. Other things that you could be doing is actually looking at our website, because the STEM Learning website has a whole section dedicated to primary science. It's our primary science landing page. And on there, you'll find every topic in the national curriculum, every year group for every topic in the national curriculum is listed there with activities under it. So that is a fantastic resource to share with your staff and for you to use as well. As mentioned earlier, the plan assessment year group matrices also have some really good ideas on them. I think that's a really great resource that has come around in the last couple of years, and it is one that I would definitely take advantage of. Another great resource is a book that's written by a colleague of ours, Nikki Waller. It's called A Creative Approach to Teaching Science. That book has loads of ideas for how you can get your practical into your lesson. It takes each curriculum statement and gives a practical activity that you could be doing for that, and explains what the working scientifically is that the children would be looking at. And finally, there's another 2 websites that I would suggest having a look at. There is the Inquiring Science for All website, which does look at each inquiry type and gives you questions that you could be asking the children for each of the year group. And also the Ogden Trust. The Ogden Trust has some lovely sheets on there that you can download, which talk about each inquiry type. They give you more information about each of them, and again it gives you some questions that you could use for investigations for each of your year groups. Thank you so much for joining us in Teaching Primary Science Getting Started. That's the end of our question and answer session. I'm sorry that we really couldn't get to all of your questions, but you really have had so many, because it's been so lovely to see so many of you joining us on this course. These are challenging times at the minute, and we do appreciate everything that you're doing. Good luck with it, and I do hope you join us on our courses again soon.